Hi everyone, I hope that you're all doing great. Welcome to this brand new episode of GemRuby Show. I am really happy and thrilled to say today we are with Julian Rubisch. Hello Julian, how are you?
Hi, I'm doing fine, thank you.
I'm doing really great too. I think even if you're quite famous in the Rails ecosystem, StimulusReflex, etc., would you like to tell us a bit about yourself, who you are, where you're working at, and what you're working on currently?
Hi, I'm Julian. I usually make the joke that I was born to do Ruby because my last name is Rubisch, which is a common Austrian name, but it always gives people a smile in the Ruby community. So I always say like I didn't stand a chance. I was born to do exactly that. I am a freelance Rails consultant from Vienna in Austria. I specialize on reactive Rails, that is
Okay.
front-end changes happening out of band due to something happening in the back-end. That's basically what StimulusReflex is known for. I am also, let's maybe do a quick side jump for a second. I'm also a electronic or experimental electronic and electroacoustic music
Oh, cool.
composer. Actually, so my pastimes are making weird noises, and I've recently done a performance at Ars Electronica in Linz. I have a sound art piece in a museum in Linz at the moment, and
Okay.
that is something that that was a bit neglected through the COVID area, and I'm very happy to be ramping up at the moment again. Yeah, and in terms of current activities, I took an attempt at productizing my consulting services, and that attempt is railsreviews.com, which is basically a productized service that will allow me to or alleviates me of some of the busy work around doing my usual code audits. So I wrote some Rubocop plugins, for example,
Okay.
and that application will allow me to link to the users or the consultant's code, and then it will run it in a sandbox. It will run certain static analysis, etc., etc. So it more or less does some of the work I would have to do. Would have to do manually, so I can provide those services at a lower price point also for my clients.
Okay.
So that's what I've been busy and also in the future I want this not only to be me who's doing it. So I've already got 2 other consultants there who you can book. So in the future I envision this to be like the freelance Rails consulting marketplace. Something like railsdevs.com for
really great.
but for like specialized needs you have in terms of consulting around Rails applications.
Okay.
Yeah.
It seems that there is a lot on your plate. Thanks to be here. So today, Julian, and as I said, I'm really thrilled to discuss with you because you are the maintainer of many gems in the Ruby ecosystem. Today, we are going to talk about one, especially the CableReady gem, which is something really cool and that you've talked about a bit, and it is in the StimulusReflex ecosystem and all this reactive stuff that can happen in your backend and react to what can happen and do stuff in your front end. So really cool. So I would like to ask you, from what you know, the experience you have today, what was the initial need of CableReady and why it is existing today?
So first of all, it's important to say that I'm not the inventor of CableReady. CableReady was built first by Nate Hopkins, who runs by the handle of Hopsoft.
Yeah.
It's also important to say that this gem predates Turbo and Hotwire by, I think, 3 years. I think the initial inception was in 2017, if memory serves me well. And when I first encountered it, that was in 2019, I was like, So there was no turbo back then yet. And I was like, well, finally somebody wrote the missing standard library to Action Cable. Because back then Action Cable was pretty new actually. There was only the Rails guides explanations, the Rails guides tutorials, which seemed very convoluted. Many moving parts you had to throw together to get something working. Also, WebSockets is something that it works. It just works completely different to a response request response cycle that you're used to from HTTP. You have to incorporate a very different mindset at times. CableReady was the first library I encountered that reduced this mental complexity you had to a minimum. So it will allow you to more or less issue commands or operations from the server side that run in your browser. That's pretty much what Turbo Streams are these days. But as I said, it was there before Turbo Streams. It also is conceptually, I think, much closer to Rails itself than Turbo. So Turbo is actually a JavaScript library that doesn't have any coupling to Rails in the first order, if you like. Whereas CableReady is completely bound to Action Cable. So if I were to contrast the two, I'd say that Turbo is something that very much more tool and language agnostic, whereas CableReady, on the other hand, can do things. It can be more performant, and it also is more likely to or more fruitful as a ground for other gems to develop upon it.
Okay.
Of which StimulusReflex is the most popular one, but there are other ones. So like, as I said, for me, it's the missing standard library. It gives you a certain set of tools in your hands you can use to build reactive, both applications and libraries in pure Ruby.
CableReady will enable you to do some stuff really precise and more performant in Ruby, more Ruby-centric, right?
Yes.
Okay.
I think that sums it up, yes.
Really cool. Really cool. And
I just want to make the point, because this is very important to me. I don't, and I never saw this as a competition between the two. So I completely endorsed Turbo and Turbo Streams, but they are not as susceptible and as as you know, not so good a ground to build other libraries upon it.
Yeah.
So Turbo is if I were to contrast the two, probably I would say Turbo is for writing applications and CableReady is more for writing other libraries with it.
Okay. Yeah. There are different tools for different needs. There is no competition between the two gem and the two libraries. And we don't want to create any competition, actually. So, okay, understood. Great to precise this and to be accurate on this. Thank you. As you said, you are not the inventor of CableReady. So a natural question that I want to ask you, actually, is how have you become a core maintainer of CableReady today?
Yes, that is something I have to think back to like 4 years right now. It's actually pretty precisely 4 years. Back then, I became aware of StimulusReflex for the first time, and it was pretty experimental back then, and I found it interesting, and I became one of the first people who would ask silly questions on the issue tracker. There was no Discord community back then, etc., etc. We all set it up after that. And then in March 2020, COVID hit, and like I was doing more freelance project-based work back then.
Okay.
And as silly as it sounds, suddenly I was in the need to be more economic with my time. I saw StimulusReflex as a opportunity to do more stuff in less time.
Okay.
Just by offloading some of the complexity I would have used pure Stimulus back then with Ajax in the background, etc., etc. And I started contributing features that were missing or fixing bugs that were in there, etc., etc. And until in the summer of 2020, Nate Hopkins, for the first time, really formed a core team because he saw the need, because it gained popularity a lot. There was still no Turbo. Turbo was like introduced, I think, Christmas 2020. And yeah, since back then, I have been maintaining both StimulusReflex and CableReady with other folks, of course. And I think nowadays you could say that we kind of split up tasks a bit, and I'm now the guy you'd ask for bug fixes in CableReady and improvements and so on and so forth.
So yeah, it was something really natural, and you already used the gem, the libraries, and when the duty called, you were there. So really cool.
Yeah.
So after some times, after working on the project, after becoming a maintainer, a core maintainer of the gem, maybe there were some technical difficulties. What was the most difficult point that you have to cope with, to face, and that maybe give you some headache and some bad night sleep?
Oh, well. I mean, there's one thing. I cannot possibly like pick one, but there's the one thing that I already hinted at is that WebSockets is completely different to normal HTTP. So for one thing, there are people and corporations who aren't really comfortable with WebSockets because they see it as a more or less reliable than traditional AJAX, for example. And there was always some bit of discussions around that, but I mean that's just the nature of the protocol. You just have to do more or less educational work. You point people at stuff like AnyCable, which kind of scales neatly. So always, also one point that was always made is like how good does Action Cable scale, and we were very thankful that we can just point to AnyCable in this process, which so the AnyCable team also became very good partners because like they always like tested their developments against StimulusReflex and other way around. So that was really also a very fruitful cooperation. And the other thing is that about WebSockets is that, yeah, for example, a WebSocket doesn't know anything about your cookies, for example. So you have to do a bit of different session management, which also always raised a bit of questions. Why can we use cookies? Well, blah, 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 blah. You have to set up authentication a bit differently, or at least you have to tune Action Cable a bit. So, for example, you have access to the current user in your CableReady operations, etc. Also, like, what happens if you want to stream an update to your users, but your users have different authorization roles. So one is an admin, the other is just a regular user, a third one is maybe an editor, and they all have different rights. And you stream them a bit of UI, so you have to be careful, like who sees what, who sees. If you think of just a like button in a social media, you have to think about who clicked that like button, who sees the like button highlighted, who doesn't, etc., etc. And it's all something that you have to handle a bit differently in WebSockets. So maybe that's the most general trope there is around technical difficulties in dealing with WebSockets.
Yeah. So this is really cool that you mentioned that we have collaboration between different projects actually, because even in open source software, we are not only centered on our own open source project, and it is always fruitful to collaborate with another open source project and learn from them, etc. And also working with, like you said, another technologies, not mainstream technologies. It is difficult to deal with the mainstream stuff that we have to integrate in our application, but cannot be managed as usual because we do not use usual technologies. I understand the point, and I guess it is something that we need to keep in mind sometimes when using another type of technologies, that with simple thing that we could consider simple, it's not as simple that we can
and
we can think of.
it also sparks creativity.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe if you're interested, I can point at one specific thing that is integrated into CableReady, and if for me is like the power horse of reactivity in Rails, and it comes with a very innocent name. It's a module called CableReady Updatable.
Mm-hmm.
And speaking of collaboration with other gems, etc., this was actually sparked by a discussion with Andrew Culver from Bullet Train.
Okay.
The idea is that you can specify a region in your view that is being kept up to date with any changes that are made to the model in the background.
Okay.
Like
wow.
magically, without you having to do anything.
Okay.
Now if you're a bit familiar with how Action Cable works and WebSockets in general, this is doable. Problem is to generalize it. Like you have to, as I said, one of the most common obstacles here is to divide this into multiple streams for different users. I mean, we don't have to go as far as think about authorizations. You can just envision that different users have different themes in their application. So one has a blue background, the other has a white background. How should the WebSocket streaming back to the actual users know about that? So it's not like it has access to some parameters for like request headers. There's no such thing like request headers in WebSockets. So how do we do it? And we came up with a pretty, I think, ingenious solution, which is we don't actually do it. What we do is when that is really pretty simplistic. So you have to enable a flag or call a class method in your models where you want to enable it. And you have to wrap your view code in a helper. That's CableReady updates for. What then happens is when something is changed in the model in a model callback, in an after commit callback, we just send an action cable ping that says, hey, something has changed to everybody who is looking on this very page at this moment. And what then happens from then on is pure Ajax. We just refetch the page or a portion of the page, and with a JavaScript library called morph_DOM, we exchange the DOM that's in this it can be very tiny, it can be just like a comment count or counter or something like that, that just keeps magically updated as changes happen to the model.
Oh, wow.
And that is something that I think is, I always mention this because I think everybody should be using it. Your code, your view code, and also your backend code streaming updates from the models. What in Turbo you would use Turbo Broadcastable, I think is the module to broadcast changes to the front end. You can skip all that. You just have to say in your model enable updates for, and then you can say which attributes can filter out, which attributes, and in the front end you say, okay, in this portion of my page, please listen for updates and keep it up to date.
Okay, yeah.
And this is an abstraction that only happened because several minds looking at it from several different viewpoints saw the connection.
Yeah, okay. It is also important to say that we have a creative job, and sometimes not working with mainstream technologies, like we said, it is also something that can brings and revive our creativity. So yeah, really cool. To go back to our question and our challenges, in every project there is the technical part, but also the non-technical part. With CableReady, as of today, what was your main non-technical obstacles to deal with?
So that is I can answer this with one sentence, but I don't want this to be misunderstood. So the main non-technical obstacle or event we faced was the introduction of Turbo.
Okay.
And that was because some people from different angles framed it as a competition. So the moment Turbo was released, we got people in the Discord community, like trolls, flaming us with, hey, why don't you stop existing? And we're like, well, why should we? And on the other hand, other people from our community were all the rage about how, I don't know, CableReady is faster and it's more this and it's more that.
Yeah.
And I'd really never endorsed that kind of view. They are just things trying to address similar targets.
Yeah.
But as I said on many occasions, I very fruitfully used them side by side in many of my projects. So, but from a non-technical perspective, that was really a hard time, like managing these different kinds of attacks, or not even attacks, but all of a sudden, a lot of people felt tempted to utter their opinion about it, and it really became like for maybe for half a year or something like that. It became something that was very fiercely debated.
Yeah.
And we tried to, from our side, from the courtroom, we tried to calm that down and say, hey, folks, this isn't a competition. We are just doing it a bit differently. And
yeah. It seems
so. Community management in that regard was probably the hardest thing in that time.
It is the first time that I have this kind of answer, actually. And yeah, it seems that there's a kind of misunderstanding of what each libraries are doing. It is not the same things, and we are not doing the same things in the same manner, you know. So yeah, I think that it is never easy to deal with people and to deal with the community, as you said. And at the same time, many gem maintainers told me that it is really important to have the feedback of the community, but at the same time, you have to manage the balance between hearing the community.
Yeah. I mean, what I learned through this, in retrospect, short period of time, is that surprisingly, for me, there are a lot of people who can't really see shades of gray. For them, it's either or. It was framed by many people that, like, you have to choose your camp now, and we were like, why? It makes no sense, and nobody. But
I understand.
Back then, I learned that not everybody. I mean, the Ruby community is very civilized.
Yeah.
But still, not everybody acts in best of faith.
Yeah.
Either intentionally or unintentionally.
So excellent. Thanks for your responses, and we come to the last question, actually. Today, with your ongoing journey through with CableReady and the ecosystem, what is making you the proudest today with all the work you have done as a core maintainer of this gem, and make you feel good about it, you know?
I think the proudest makes me like, this is actually something that I only learned very recently, is that two of my gems, the one is CableReady and updatable, the module in particular, and the other we didn't talk about is Futurism, which is a lazy loading solution also that I wrote even prior to lazy loaded turbo frames. Okay. It works a bit differently. It doesn't work on a controller basis. It works on a partial basis. So if you know how to render a partial, you also know how to lazy load it with Futurism. That was my goal in terms of developer experience. But those two are used for making the amount of traffic that ClickFunnels, which is one of the largest. It's a bit of a hidden champion there, but it manages a lot of traffic, and they have become sponsors also of a good portion of Bullet Train, for example. of some conferences in this part of the ecosystem, etc. And that makes me proud that two of the small things that I thought would be beneficial to my little apps that I develop also are scalable to an app handling like 400 millions of requests per month, I believe, or so, and many more visits, of course.
Okay, yeah.
So, and I only learned this like a week ago or so.
Okay, very cool.
Really
Good
nice.
timing actually for that question. Okay, okay,
Sure.
very cool. Yeah, I guess that seeing people use what we have built and seeing that it is scaling and providing value to people around the world and to companies, it is a really good feeling. I can understand that. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Julian, to have been here today. We the podcast came to an end, and really a great thanks to you. Maybe you want to tell us where we can find you on the internet?
Yeah. First of all, thanks for having me. It's always a pleasure to be on podcasts, and I hope to find more time in the future to do this more often. And so I'm very, very plain. So on Twitter or X, you can find me under Julian_Rubisch, and on GitHub it's just Julian Rubisch in one word. And also maybe just I also have a bio.link/Julian Rubisch, where all the other stuff like the info products I have written in the past, etc., are all mentioned in one place.
Okay, really great. So thanks everyone to have listened to this podcast. You can also find me on the Twitter and the internet on yet_another_dev. And thanks everyone. Thanks Julian again. I hope that we will be able to discuss more in the future about CableReady and all the Ruby ecosystem for another things, And thanks a lot. See you soon with another invitee. And goodbye, Julian.
Goodbye. Thank you.